Hey, what's up? Dr. Mike here, the mad scientist of metal. Today I want to talk about the common mistakes that you guys, musicians, make when recording metal at home. And I know that because I receive a lot of self-recorded stuff here to mix, sometimes to record as well, maybe it's a part of the process, and there are common things, maybe not so much of mistakes, but challenges or issues that musicians face at home because you guys just don't know certain things about the process and about how audio is getting processed on the next stages, and therefore you don't know what to look for. So my job today is to shed some light on those important areas and hopefully help you with your next recording. Let's get this out of the way. Subscribe and like and share so that you guys benefit from the value that I'm sharing. Thanks, cheers, let's do more. And the first thing that I want to bring up is inconsistent levels when recording your stuff at home. This is really important because of the consequent further steps down in the process. And I'm talking about mixing, and I'm talking about audio dynamics and how audio varies in levels across the track. If, for instance, you've recorded vocals and they're too dynamic, they differ in 10 decibels here and there, they're really quiet, that is not going to help your mix engineer on the next steps because they will simply be drowned in the mix on the quiet bit. So inevitably what will happen is either that little fragment will be boosted up, potential loss of quality, or everything will be compressed and squashed so that it's more even and it can stand out in the mix, which doesn't sound that great on occasions, okay? On occasions. So I'm gonna show you a bit of an example here. This is a test mix that I did in 2018, so ages ago, and the band is no more, so I'll just show a few little snippets. Have a look here. This is a vocal track, and this is a vocal double. And you can see that here, even visually, the level is equal, whereas here, it's completely quiet. It's maybe 6 to 10 decibels quieter visually than this fragment here. So any processing, any compression, any dynamic processing will end up not affecting this fragment and affecting this more heavily, which is no good. Bloody battery died. So I'm starting over this fragment. So, back to these vocals. As a mix engineer, the issue of dynamic vocals can be fixed by applying so-called clip gain, so I can boost this little fragment and make sure that it is more equal. Downside, though, obviously, is that if you boost something, you will boost the background noise as well, so there is loss of quality happening. Or, otherwise, I could simply compress them harder, but in that case, I would have to compress them really hard so that this bit is chucked down and this one is evened out as well, and then people blame mixing engineers for compressing too much. Just a joke. Let's have a listen with and without to see what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna...
Hold on! For their life! Grab it before it!
So this is before.
Hold on! For their life! Grab it before it!
You can see there's a significant difference. Double vocals, so the line that actually sits underneath, is much more consistent now after I've applied clip gain, and it supports the main line much better, which is clearly a big deal for your consistent and big sound. Let's talk a little bit about the solutions to this problem and how you can approach it better. So, obviously, first thing is simply keeping this in mind and simply making sure that your waveforms, when you record them, look at least somewhat similar in terms of the level is quite crucial in my opinion. But also, say, if we're talking about vocals, coming to the mic closer when you're doing something intimate or whispering. And then coming really, really far when you're screaming is a microphone technique that one has to take into account when recording vocals, and this will help to smoothen this out and be more consistent. So consistent level is bloody important. And I'm not even talking only about vocals here. If we look at this bass here, you can see that while these beats are kind of hot, this one is really quiet. Similarly, these are of average volume, but this fragment is quieter and quieter as well. So all of this ideally would have been approached properly by maybe punching in the bits that are quieter, maybe adjusting the playing technique, maybe moving your hand closer to the pickup or picking harder, or if you're doing the pick bass, picking harder with a pick, and simply looking, as well as obviously listening, to how this stuff sounds and whether it is consistent enough or not. So overall, if you got problems with some notes falling off and not being pronounced and heard, maybe it's time to consider dynamics when recording. On this same theme, let's talk about doubling and layering. And what I see a lot is musicians record doubles, doubled up vocals, doubled up guitars, and these are not exactly tight. And a common misconception is that, well, in the mix it will be fine, it will be masked by other instruments, or there will be tons of layers, as you probably can see here, tons of different layers, that will cover up those inconsistencies. Truth is, it's not the case. If you want a tight and heavy, bloody heavy recording, you need to approach tightness in a very neat manner. Because all these inconsistencies will create a bit of a mud and will not sound right. Say here, let's have a bit of a listen. So there's a double vocals and another double, so it's a triple for some reason. Speaking about unnecessary layers, maybe it is necessary in this case, I don't know, but logically it doesn't seem right to add more on top of the stuff that isn't tight already. It seems more logical to clean up the existing stuff and keep it simpler, which we'll get to later. If you have listened to this fragment.
Cannot buy a string. Buy a string.
This is not tight.
Buy a string.
This is tight. So these two are tight, but this one isn't. And it's not recorded well for that reason. And for instance, in this example here, I cannot fix it simply because the tail is not present. I could possibly maybe shorten these. Have a listen.
Buy a string.
That's a different line performed. So all these things come into consideration when recording layers and doubles. And this is super important. What I would have done if I was on the session, I would have asked to do another take of this, being tighter into this. Does not necessarily have to be exact and does not necessarily have to be perfect. Simply tight, so that they don't stand out and they work together. Similarly with the guitars. Guitars are even bigger thing in that regard. If we have a listen to the line. These chugs, left and right channels, differ too much. They, therefore, create problems in terms of dynamics because the palm mute on the left side comes in earlier than the palm mute on the right side. And what that does, it creates extra pressure which needs to be tamed down, possibly with a multiband compressor on the guitar bass. Let's actually have a listen if I've done that. Most definitely I have. Most definitely I have. And it's doing a fair bit of muscle work in order to get this under control. So, certainly a problem, which is not hard to address. You simply record one guitar line into the click really tightly, and then you do another one, and these work together, which clearly hasn't been done here. I'll show you a bit of a trick right now, which is important, and I think you may appreciate that. In order to listen, in order to hear those problems clearly and easily, pan this guitar center, both of them, left and right channels, pan them hard center, equal level, have a listen. Have you heard that? That doubling of the note that wasn't there? So mistakes will occur really, really obviously when you're working in mono. So sometimes this helps to tame it down. Other times you're fine to just use left and right hard panned as always and take that into account. Cool. Another thing that I would like to consider is when you guys overcomplicate the recording and you keep it too busy with some layers which you are not sure whether they work or not. And I see that quite often. And then again, sometimes you just don't know that tight left and right guitar channels, tight bass and tight drums is more than enough to create a super solid and big sounding mix already. And then you keep adding stuff on top, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And sometimes it simply creates a different feel, which you may or may not be going for. In this example here, there's so much going on. If you listen to those things all together.
Force away!
I actually like that. No problems.
They cannot buy us through.
That's fine too. Yeah, this is a good example here. See? The more stuff has been added here, the messier and muddier it sounds. This one here is kinda middle howly vocal. This is a bit higher. This is kinda low. This is high. This is also high, and altogether it sounds a bit messy. What if we only left these four? That's enough. Dude, that's simply enough for this part to be heavy and massive. So, to me it is important to consider what you're going for and not overcomplicating things. The more stuff you add, the easier it gets to not get things right, to not get them tight, especially if you are self-recording and don't have huge experience. It's harder then to communicate what you want from each part, and frankly enough, you may just not be aware of you want anymore. So just keeping things simpler and focusing on neat recording of each part is more than enough to deliver great sounding results. And I would encourage you to consider this as Occam's razor. The simplicity will deliver for you. And on that, I would like to wrap up this video by talking about the sounds that you have not found for your recording. So, not discovering the sounds that you like and want to implement. This is a big one, and this is a bit difficult sometimes because it crosses the fine line between being really experienced in the production process and knowing how things are supposed to sound versus, on the other extreme, not having any indication of what you want to sound like and trusting someone else, be it your band member who mixes the record, or a mixing engineer or a producer, to dial in those sounds for you. Now the problem comes when you are not sure what you want and you're describing the sounds that you think work, but in reality they are not what you actually want because you have little experience isolating these sounds in solo and understanding how sound in solo would work and translating the final mix. One of the extremes comes when bands send MIDI drums, expecting a producer to completely come up with the sound for the recording drum-wise. And now, for certain styles of metal, this is applicable. If we're talking about modern metal and those GGD sort of sounds, I guess that works. It doesn't quite work for me, just particularly because I like to keep things unique and develop approaches for each project, for each client, for each band, absolutely in a unique way. And I understand that it doesn't work for everyone, and I'm completely fine with that. But what bothers me is when people are trying to copycat sounds from another production, at least without experimenting with stuff. I think it's completely fine if you don't know how to approach these sounds, but at least you attempt it and, you try to analyze what you like in your attempts and what you don't. If you say, well, my guitar sounds like crap, but I kind of like that tone, at least this gives some sort of indication of what your favorite guitar sounds are, what you're going for, and what sort of sound will work for you. I've come across a couple of situations when musicians attempted to explain what they want in broad terms, and I delivered similar results, and they didn't like it, and we had to start from ground up, because actually that was not the thing that was in their heads. But there was also no clear attempt to try and dial those sounds with any tools that you got. Keep in mind that the perception when working on your initial sound results, sometimes even in demos, is fresh, and that is irreplaceable. I myself have carried over certain tones from my demo and even certain lines and recordings into the final product because I could not replicate that on the day. That had simply some sort of different feel and different sound to it, which was not replicable. And so all I'm encouraging you to do is consider this initial result. Think about that sound, think what you like and what you don't like about it, and use it as at least a starting anchor point that can be complemented with something else, rather than complete and full replacement, be it a guitar reamp, bass reamp, drum reamp, or whatever it may be. On that, I'll sign off. I hope that you find this video useful, and I really appreciate your time here. Please let me know if any of that helps you with your next heavy recording. Cheers!